The following is a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome back to episode number 6 on Logical Fallacies with Coach Nagy hosting, along with Nick Adair. Nick Adair, we have on screen already. So, Nick, why don't we go straight into the presentation? This is number 12, I believe.
Absolutely. We ended our last presentation with appealing to authority, and this time we're going to go ahead and appeal to nature. One moment here. It looks like I'm having a little technical difficulty, and I think it's going to throw Kevin off. We might want to stop. I'm sorry.
All right.
I'm on black screen. I'll just cut it out.
Okay, so we'll get back here. Okay, so just continue where we left off. All right, so the last time we appealed to authority, this time we're going to go. All right, last time we appealed to authority, this time we're going to go ahead and appeal to nature, which is a little bit different, but kind of on the same wavelength. Many natural things are also considered good, and this can bias our thinking, but naturalness itself doesn't make something good or bad. For instance, murder could be seen as very natural, but that doesn't mean it's justifiable. So basically, the argument that because something is natural, it's therefore valid, justified, inevitable, good, or ideal. A lot of people use this as far as a health kick is concerned. Apples are natural, so they have to be good for you. But you can look at some of the things that are inside of an apple, and it may not be the best thing for certain people to have. But we still appeal to the fact that it's natural, so therefore it has to be good. People that have an allergy to citrus obviously shouldn't eat oranges, but because it's natural, because it's grown and natural, it should be okay.
I'm sorry, I'm giggling because you're talking about fruit and then you're talking about appeal to nature. And I put the two together in my head and I started giggling.
I should have brought bananas up. That would have been a lot better. Here's a prime example.
Wonderful.
The medicine man rolled into town on his bandwagon. There's that word again. Offering various natural remedies, such as very special plain water. He said that it was only natural and that people should be wary of artificial medicines like antibiotics. The snake oil salesman says you should buy this amazing snake oil and not take antibiotics. How exactly is that going to work out? Oh, are we frozen?
Yeah, I think we got frozen a little bit there.
So what did we miss?
It got very spotty for me on my side.
Yeah, the last 30 seconds was totally dead air, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. Do we want to start this one over? Because we were already looking at something that wasn't great.
Yeah, I'm just going to let it roll and I'll just edit it on from here. I'll fade to black, give it about a 10-second black window so I can go to it. John, I'll give you a countdown. You can say, welcome back to part number 6, in our logical fallacies with Nick Adair. Let's get right into it or whatever, and we'll go from there, okay? So I'm going to go on.
Okay, starting over. Gotcha.
Yeah, starting over, I'll go on mute. I'll fade to black, and I'll give you a count in 5 down. You can see my camera, right? Yes? Now?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal.
I can.
All right.
And welcome back to Logical Fallacies with Coach Nagy and our special guest, Nick Adair from Homer, Alaska. Nick, this is episode number 6, I believe, if I've got the numbers correct. And we're going to go straight into the presentation with number 12 on the logical fallacy list.
Yes, we ended our last one with appealing to authority. We're going to jump into appealing to nature. This is kind of a big one that you hear quite a bit nowadays. Many natural things are also considered good, and this can bias our thinking. But naturalness itself doesn't make something good or bad. For instance, murder could be seen as natural, and that doesn't mean it's justifiable. Um, a good concept of appealing to nature would be bananas are natural, so they must be okay. But if somebody's got an allergy out there to bananas, then it doesn't necessarily make it okay. But a lot of people like to appeal to the fact that things are natural, so therefore they must be better or they must be correct.
Yeah, it's very much like sunshine is natural, but too much of it is going to cause some problem, and long-term exposure could possibly kill you if it well causes you a third-degree burn.
No, absolutely. That's probably one of the best examples. I'm going to throw up another example here. The medicine man rolled into town on his bandwagon, offering various natural remedies, such as a very special plain water. He said that it was only natural that people should be wary of artificial medicines like antibiotics. Now, we've all heard the concept out there right now that antibiotics are actually bad for people. Uh, no, I'm sorry, it's vaccines. Antibiotics are actually good for people. But there are people out there that say that vaccines, because they're not natural, they cause problems. Antibiotics are a way of getting rid of bacterial infections that people can get from being out in nature. So it's kind of a double-edged sword argument.
Well, the antibiotics are absolutely natural from what it is that we started with Louis Pasteur. He discovered penicillin, which was a natural antibiotic given off by mold on bread from the vision that I remember as, from a youth. The only difference is that these are refined, as in they've taken that mold and they've increased um, the they've taken the antibiotic and filtered out all the impurities, and they basically amped it up by making more of it within a smaller space, so to speak. Um, and the same thing with vaccines. The first vaccine was basically cowpox, and I forget the exact person who was doing it, but he was finding out that the milkmaids were immune to or suffering less from smallpox because they came down with cowpox first. And the first inoculations were vaccines based on live bugs. It's only later on that they started the variations and doing a whole bunch of refinement. But that takes us away from the logical fallacy, doesn't it?
A little bit. They studied it and found that exactly what was happening was what needed to be, or how they needed to resolve it. They found out where the pox was coming from, and then reasonably through our quote unquote scientific method, they were able to determine that nature in this particular instance was actually the problem. Although I do have a question. Was Louis Pasteur the one that left the sandwich out, or he was the one that came up with pasteurization from milk?
Um, I think it was both,
Was it
but
both?
I'll have to do some research and get back with you on that.
I always laughed at that story. How many times do you think that guy went into the office and one of his office uh, mates looked at him and went, "Dude, you left your sandwich out again. Can you please clean your crap up?" And then one day he went, "Oh, look what I just did." But yeah, that the appeal to nature is a big situation. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not, but not necessarily is it always the truth. And
So just by appealing to nature shouldn't make our search for truth end. We should continue to make sure that the nature that we're pointing at actually validates the truth that we're seeking.
absolutely correct. And then we'll move on to composition division. This one is pretty major. If you watch any bit of the news today, you see a lot of division and a lot of composition. And when I say composition, I'm not talking
Get
about
into
writing
some more
papers.
de- give me some more detail, as in what are they using composition and division in this particular application for?
Well, when something is true for the part, it does not also apply to the whole. But because this isn't always the case, it can't be presumed to be true. We have to show evidence for why a consistency will exist. So here's an example. This is the best way to dive into this one. Daniel was a precocious child and had a liking for logic. He reasoned that atoms are invisible and that he was made of atoms and therefore he's invisible too. Unfortunately, despite his thinking skills, he still lost the game of hide and go seek. So he put together a what you would consider a logical argument. Atoms are invisible. I'm made up of atoms. I must be invisible. It if you follow the logic, it kind of works, but he missed a few steps in that little aspect. But the composition is put together as the logical argument, but the division are the steps that he missed. So this is almost what I would call an inverse slippery slope. Just
Yeah,
because
I'm going through the thinking here, and what I'm hearing is that if somebody could see a small part uh, that appears to be truthful, then they apply it to a whole, but the application is not necessarily something that can be applied to a whole, because it only it's very much like deconstructionism. If you deconstruct something to the point where you can prove that one aspect is false, therefore you say, well, the entire thing must be false because this one little thing is false. But it's just kind of the opposite. They're saying because this one little piece is true, therefore we can apply it to the entire we can generalize and apply it to the whole when it really doesn't apply.
correct. It's both. It's if one part of it's true, the whole thing is assumed to be true, or if one part of it's false, the whole thing is assumed to be false. That's one of the composition, the other one's the division, and we do see that quite a bit. That's how these political attacks that you see politicians doing on the news. They say, well, this person voted negative on this aspect, so all the rest of their votes must not be correct.
And I see this happening online where I'll post something that, in my opinion, is hysterical. And because the meme came from a objectionable source, somebody who happens to be political, or a website that happens to be uh, not in agreement with a lot of another website's policies, all of a sudden it becomes a focal point for division. And the whole point of the meme was humor. It had nothing to do with politics or the individual who posted it, but because it came from that, therefore it's being thrown out.
Absolutely. I posted something a long time ago from, I'm trying to remember the name of the philosopher, but it's escaping me right now. But the immediate response I got, it was a concept of philosophy. The immediate response I got was, well, he doesn't believe in God, so that must not be true. And I said, well, look at the statement that he said. The statement very much defines humanity. Yeah, but because he doesn't believe in God, that can't be real. That's an immediate that's an immediate
So
division argument.
is this kind of a version of the ad hominem, where because you are now attacking a particular portion of what's being talked about, or validating a particular portion, therefore it can either validate and or invalidate the whole?
It is kind of like ad hominem. Ad hominem is attacking the person's character. This is basically like if you this is basically attacking a kind of like a track record. If you were a race car driver and you won 10 races in a row, but on the fifth race you messed up and hit one of the other cars and screwed up and now you're out of the race. This would be like them saying, well, he screwed up in the fifth race. What makes you think he's going to do fine in the next four? That's kind of a division argument. The guy's a professional race car driver. He knows how to drive. He knows how to drive a car. But because he made a
So
mistake or
it's
wanted
not
to,
only
sorry, go
it's
ahead.
not only the possibility of it attacking, but it also could be, in this particular example, it's not attacking, but it's saying because of this small section being true, therefore we're going to apply it to the whole. And it could be done in just the opposite. You can go ahead because this is one little thing is false or out of place, therefore we can throw the entire thing out.
Um, that's
It
the
could
idea.
either be
Is
an
that,
attack or it could be.
well, that's the idea. the
Go ahead.
The idea is that just because part of the argument doesn't fit or isn't right, it people want to dismiss the whole argument. That's not what this is about. That's why when um, Daniel said that he's made of atoms and atoms are invisible, he must be invisible. One part of that aspect is wrong, but he is made of atoms and atoms are invisible. That's true, but Daniel's not invisible, and that's the false part. So that's he put together bad logic, a composition of bad logic, but only one of the aspects is actually not right. So what people want to do is they go, "Come on, Daniel, that whole argument's baloney. You're not invisible, atoms aren't invisible, and you're not made of atoms." Whereas we know that's not
But
the case.
Daniel's putting together a logical fallacy to justify his reasoning and his conclusion that he must be invisible. And so here in Daniel's case, he's actually using a logical fallacy to bolster his argument. And the fact of the matter is, not only is he not invisible, but his argument's transparent as well.
No, that's absolutely true. But to dismiss his entire argument, to dismiss the fact that he's made of atoms and atoms are invisible, that would be wrong. That doesn't get to the truth because those are two true statements.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
not a problem. We'll jump to the next one. And the next one is
okay.
anecdote or the anecdotal argument. This one, this is probably my worst. I have anecdotes and when it comes to discussions and things that I've heard. But what I try to do whenever I bring up an anecdote is I let people know this is just an anecdote. This has nothing to do with the argument. Although I may see it from this perspective, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It's just my perspective. It's often easier for people to believe someone's testimony as opposed to understanding variation across the continuum. Scientific and statistical measures are almost always more accurate than individual perceptions and experiences. Um, it's the anecdote comes from a personal experience. So for you to explain something that you saw or you've talked about or you've been party to doesn't necessarily mean it's truth from a different perspective. They may not see it that way. Um, so personal experience, whoops, I messed up there. I'm going to go back. Using personal experience or an isolated example instead of a valid argument, especially to dismiss statistics. So if somebody says people who go to the doctor are often sick, and I bring up a personal experience where I say, well, I've been to the doctor before when I wasn't sick. I just had to stop by and fill out some paperwork. That's an anecdote from my side of things. It doesn't necessarily make the other argument invalid just because I see it from a different perspective. So we'll bring this one up here. Jason said that um, Jason said that all was cool and everything, but my grandfather smoked like 30 cigarettes a day and he lived until he was 97. So don't believe all you read about meta analysis or sound studies showing proven causal relationships. Jason's basically trying to say that his grandfather smoked, I don't know how many cigarettes 30 is in a pack, but or 2 pack, 3 pack a day. He smoked a bunch of cigarettes and he still lived to be 97. So basically, smoking doesn't cause any health problems because of his particular experience.
So the basis of an anecdotal fallacy, logical fallacy, is to present information that is personal, that hasn't been tested or proved out. It's a story, and that's all it really is a story, a personal story. And it may very well be a true story or true perspective of a story, but in and of itself, it's not a way of finding truth. It could be on the way to talking about discovering truth, but in and of itself is not truth. It's a story that would have to be somehow tested and validated somehow.
Um, well, it's an anecdote, so it can't be tested or validated. Well, not necessarily. I suppose it could, but really, what it is it's from one person's perspective. Jason had a grandfather that smoked 30 cigarettes a day and lived to be 97. We accept that to be true. But Jason trying to tell us that because his grandfather smoked 30 cigarettes a day and lived to 97, that you don't need to worry about causal relationships in things like cancer. So Jason's trying to say that just it doesn't always affect everybody the same way from his point of view. Um,
Which
it'd be
in
like,
itself could be is valid. Obviously, if what he says is a valid story about his grandfather, he's taking that valid story and generalizing and saying that that is the way it is with every grandfather or any person, that the relationship between smoking and cancer can be dismissed because, by God, I have a grandfather who didn't suffer at all from cancer, and he smoked all his life, or a long time.
exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's it adding the anecdote to a discussion is not always a bad thing, but you have to leave it at just being an anecdote. If Jason was to say, my grandfather smoked 30 cigarettes a day and he lived to be 97, so he was pretty lucky he never got cancer. All of a sudden, it's just a story. It's just an anecdote to add to the situation. But to use it to dismiss possibilities or getting to the truth of the argument, that's where it comes into a problem.
And then we start asking Jason, well, what about his 6 wives who all died from secondhand smoke? Sorry,
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
that's probably
uh,
the case. But that's our three of them for today. We got a few more that we'll be jumping into next time. And the heads up on that is we're going to do the appeal to emotion. They're also going to do the 2Q, which is a little hard to understand, but we'll get to that one as well. And then we're going to be doing what's called the burden of proof. That one is a really, really big one that we see nowadays all over the news. Like, who can prove this and who is the person that has to do it. But other than that, we're good for today.
thank you once again, Nick. This has been John Nagy, otherwise known as the Coach, and Nick Adair, talking about logical fallacies, and we'll be up and running on episode 7 in about a week. Until then, be well and travel light.
You've been watching A Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.